It's a tough one this weekend. The Broncos coming to town. We couldn't always say that about this matchup. What to make of this dangerous Denver team? Welcome to the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans and Broncos. I got a guest with me today. Who better to talk Broncos with than my guy, Ryan Edwards of KOA Colorado, afternoon show host, pre and post for the Denver Broncos. My man, we've been talking football, Texans, Broncos for years. I'm glad to get you here on the YouTube channel, and you are the resource for me when I want to talk about the Broncos, man.
I appreciate that, man. It's great to be here.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what happened with this Broncos team, because they're on a winning streak. They're the hottest team in the NFL, 5-game winning streak. They turned their entire season around. I remember at the trade deadline, everyone's like, trade everybody, get rid of them, restart, reshuffle. And now here they are, right in the thick of things in the playoff race. What turned around for this Broncos team?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild. You start 1-5, and especially what most people remember for the Broncos is the 70 points they gave up to the Miami Dolphins. And it's almost like it's two different teams in a lot of ways, because the turnaround, in my opinion, started with the defense. And actually, it started in a loss at Arrowhead on Thursday night. They played at Arrowhead. They lost a really close game, but the defense finally started to show some competency. And I think at that point, it's sort of be like, okay, maybe this thing could kind of come together. And I remember Sean Payton saying in his post-game press conference, I'm not discouraged. And there's a lot of people like, not discouraged, man, you're 1-5. What do you mean not discouraged? And so sure enough, they turn around, they beat Green Bay the next week. They beat the Chiefs for the first time in 16 times. I mean, they lost 16 straight. They go on, and after the bye, they beat Buffalo. I mean, they've strung together some pretty quality wins during that streak. But yeah, I come back to the defense. The defense, not only are they turning the ball over at an unbelievable historic rate, I think in the 5-game winning streak, they have a 16-3 turnover margin, which is just bonkers, right? 1 out of every 4 drives against this team right now is a turnover. That is an unbelievable stat, right? So it probably can't keep going like this, but while it is, they're certainly reaping the benefits.
You mentioned Sean Payton. That thing was, I know in Houston there weren't a lot of fans that wanted Sean Payton. There was the commitment from a draft pick standpoint. There was the financial commitment. There was kind of the how malleable is he? Would he work with Nick Caserio type thing? But it felt like for what the Broncos needed, that's kind of the dude. It starts disappointing. How important has it been to have kind of that adult in the room, been there, done that? How much has it been, hey, Sean Payton just kind of pulled this team up from its bootstraps?
Well, it's remarkable you bring that up, because we were just talking about on the show yesterday how many people in Denver wanted D'Amico Ryans. So yeah. It's and I was one of them. I was one of the people pounding the table for D'Amico Ryans. I'm a big fan. Certainly, I'm not surprised by how he's performing out there with Houston. The team, especially the defense. I know that there's still a few pieces away, but the defense is definitely looking like a D'Amico Ryans defense. So yeah. A lot of excitement, I'm sure, out there in Houston. But I think that it is. I mean, considering what they've come from, right? They went 3 first-time head coaches right before Sean Payton. They had Vance Joseph, who is now the defensive coordinator. They had Vic Fangio, and they had Nathaniel Hackett, and they just kept sort of spinning their wheels there. And it's not that they didn't interview coaches with experience; they just kept going with first-time coaches, and it wasn't working out. And you know how this thing works. I mean, oftentimes you go with one extreme to the other. In fact, the perfect example is going from Vic Fangio to Nathaniel Hackett, 2 completely opposite personalities in every sense of the word. I think they really, they really wanted Jim Harbaugh, the ownership group. It's a new ownership group. They really wanted Jim Harbaugh. That didn't work out. He stayed at Michigan. I know D'Amico Ryans was a finalist. There was a lot of interest there. And then again, I think Sean Payton was kind of in the mix there too. And, when D'Amico, I think, decided to go to Houston, they kind of said, okay, let's go with Sean Payton. And I do think that he brings a detail work here, a detail work ethic, a detail focus that they haven't had in a long time. I mean, probably since Gary Kubiak. And that's what happens when you have a guy that has done it before. He knows what it's supposed to look like. He knows championship football. And a lot of the people have finally bought in. I think it took a little bit of time, but I think we're there now.
All right, Ryan, we talked about Sean Payton. He shows up this year. Last year, Russell Wilson showed up, but it wasn't Russell Wilson. All right, what's Russ cooking with these days? It feels like he's sort of settled down. He's playing a little bit closer to Seattle Russell Wilson. Maybe it's not the eye-popping stats on a week-in, week-out basis, but he's not a detriment to winning like it felt like maybe he was a couple of different times last year. What's the state of Mr. Unlimited?
Yeah, I mean, again, last year was just such a disaster on so many fronts, and Russ was a big part of that, and especially the expectations of Russ. And I think there's some humbling that ultimately needed to happen there, not just from Russ, but maybe some other people involved in the organization. So, you fast forward a year, and he came into this thing, I think, with kind of an open mind on what his role and what the quarterback position kind of looks like. And in a lot of ways, like you mentioned, the Seattle Russ, what made him so great there is his ability to win games, his ability to put together clutch performances at the end of the fourth quarter and end of halftime. And that's, I think sometimes you lose sight of that. And I think for him, he wanted to come here and he wanted to be known as, hey, I can be just as good as Patrick Mahomes. I can be just as good as Josh Allen. I can be Tom Brady. I can be Peyton Manning. And in the end, you have to kind of realize what you really are. And what you really are and your superpower is you win games. And he's done that better than a lot of quarterbacks over the last decade plus. So I think that he had to kind of to reimagine himself just a bit and really kind of dive into what he is and what he's good at. And I think Sean Payton has done a good job focusing him on that and saying, hey, maybe I'm going to put some governors on this offense. And that certainly looks that way. I mean, there's definitely times where you're saying, boy, there's another level to this thing, but they are not turning the ball over. And that's been a key. As I mentioned, the 16-3 ratio, it's been key. They haven't been turning the ball over. And as a result of not turning the ball over, they've been in these games. And sometimes to the narrowest of margins, the Buffalo Bills and the Minnesota Vikings games are perfect examples. You turn the ball over more than one time against Buffalo, you're going to lose that game. You turn the ball over at all against Minnesota, you're going to lose that game. But they're not turning the ball over, and specifically him, who leads now the league in the least amount of interceptions. That's been a big part.
Man, Marvin Mims was one of my favorite draft prospects. Yeah. I see some of the explosiveness, and it's just like, we can't get this guy the ball a little bit more, like just a little bit tiny more. Marvin Mims.
Hey man, you might as well be doing sports talking here in Denver because we saw him at the beginning of the year and he had all these explosive plays, and I was a big fan of his coming out of Oklahoma. I thought that was a steal in the draft for the Broncos. It was a little bit curious because they already had a loaded wide receiver room. But again, that's, Sean Payton's coming here and he said, hey, I need this guy. I need the speed. I need the explosiveness. And we saw it right off the bat. First few games of the season, he's having some of the biggest explosive plays that this team has seen in a long time. And then all of a sudden he just sort of disappeared. And it's not his fault. They're definitely putting him out there. He's just not a heavily targeted guy. But then I'd also say that about the rest of the receiver room. Other than Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy got 2 targets this last week, right? Wow. I mean, that's it. It's kind of been a little bit more famine for many of the wide receivers, with the exception of Courtland Sutton. I think there's clearly another level for this group, but I'm also not too surprised because if you go back to the Saints with New Orleans with Sean Payton, it was Michael Thomas, it was Marquise Colston, and then it was kind of everybody else, right? Sure. I mean, everybody else would once in a while those guys would pop. You'd have a Ted Ginn game, but it was the running backs out of the backfield, and it was wide receiver one. And so I think we're kind of settling into a little bit of that.
Ryan Edwards, my guest here on the channel today. Afternoon radio, KOA Colorado in Denver, and pre and post for the Denver Broncos. Okay, yesterday, CJ Stroud called Patrick Surtain the best cornerback in football. And he said if he's not the best to you, at worst, he's top 3. We know about Patrick Surtain. He's incredible. He's awesome. Justin Simmons is a freak at the safety spot. He can Mr. Do-It-All. What else do I need to know about this Denver defense? Because I look through it and I don't see a lot of names that are super recognizable immediately. So I know about the Surtain. I know about Simmons, but what else I need to know about this Denver defense?
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's been, at least when they came into the season, one of the reasons they were flying under the radar. And then they started out slow, and so a lot of people sort of confirmed that they weren't going to be a good defense. But there's actually a lot of talent, a lot of young talent here. You mentioned definitely the top 2 names. There's no question. Surtain and Simmons are the top 2 guys. I think both automatic Pro Bowlers at this point. I mean, we'll ultimately see what it goes. Maybe all pros for both, but they're definitely in that conversation every single year. Up front, it's a young group because they decided that because they had 2 vets here. They had Frank Clark and they had Randy Gregory at the beginning of the season. And Randy Gregory, they had given a really big contract from Dallas. and he just didn't work out. He wasn't the kind of the leader that they were looking for. He wasn't the kind of player they were looking for. And then they kind of realized, hey, the younger guys are playing better. Let's get them more snaps. So, and then they knew, and Baron Browning at the time was on PUP. I think he's probably pound for pound their best pass rusher out of Ohio State. He's been here for a couple of years. He was on the PUP, but he's back and he looks really, really good. Nick Bonito is a second-round pick from last year. He is leading the team in sacks right now. And again, just super athletic. The biggest question about him coming into the season was whether or not he could hold up against the run, but I think he's really improved that aspect of his game. Jonathan Cooper, Ozzy on the other side, he's a guy that is a seventh-round pick. So oftentimes those guys don't pop, but this guy has been just sort of a workhorse for him out there. And again, not massive names, but all very productive players. And they went, it's an interesting stat. Brett Coleman put this out. When they moved on from Randy Gregory and Frank Clark, they were the 31st pressure team in the NFL. When they moved on from those guys, they jumped to 12th. Now, again, cause and effect, whatever, but they got better. They got better by subtraction. And then in the middle, you got DJ Jones, who's a former 49er. He's been here for a couple of years. You've got Zach Allen, who's one of their primary defensive tackle guys they added in the offseason from Arizona. And then, their linebacker core, I think Alex Singleton and Josie Jewell probably don't get enough attention. They're really good, run stop linebackers. Alex Singleton's more of your cover guy. He's got a little more of that athleticism. But they drafted an inside linebacker in Drew Sanders in the NFL draft this last year. And I think that there's expectation one day he'll take over in that inside linebacker role. But right now they're using him a little bit more at edge because he's got that versatility. But like I said, what you look at this defense, they definitely have the two names in the back end, but there's a lot of young talent, young ascending talent up front.
All right, last one here for you, man. You look at this Texans team, and this was a question that probably would have made people laugh the past 3 years. What scares you about the Texans? You watch the Texans, you see what they've been able to put together. When you look at the Texans, what are you worried about come Sunday?
Well, Tank Dell is on my fantasy team, so I know exactly what he's capable of. Yeah, CJ Stroud, what can you say? It's been just so much fun to watch him grow. And he's my favorite quarterback in the draft. He was the guy that I said, if you were going to somehow decide to get wily and move up and go get a quarterback, that's the dude. I mean, the Broncos were never going to do that, but that was my favorite quarterback in the draft. So it's not really a shock to me to see him performing the way he is, setting the rookie records. I think, being in the MVP conversation may be a little bit of a jump from what I expected out of him, but my goodness, it's been fun to watch. Certainly fun to watch. And I'd say it starts with the offense. Between Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and we'll see if Noah Brown can play. But there's just so much talent in that receiving group. You guys are a little banged up on the offensive line, so that I think is going to be that's going to be a bit of a challenge in this one. But CJ, he's only kind of middle of the pack and taking sacks. He doesn't turn the ball over a ton, maybe a couple fumbles, but he's kind of I think last I checked, interceptions are pretty down. I think he's only got 5. So that's it. If this game turns into a track meet, and that could be a problem for the Broncos because they're not really built for that just yet. I'm not saying that the Texans are about to hang 70 on this team like the Dolphins did.
Come on.
But they're capable of putting up a lot of points in a hurry. And if the Broncos get down in this one and they have to open things up, and Russ maybe throws an interception or two, that changes the mathematics for the Broncos. That changes it. So that's the one thing we've been talking about here is if the Texans turn this into a track meet, what are the Broncos going to do? I don't see it necessarily that. I still think both teams are going to probably find themselves in the 20s in this one. I think it's going to be a really fun game. But yeah, that's the one thing, the Texans are built like that. And the Broncos are not.
Ryan Edwards, R Edwards Radio on X, formerly known as Twitter. The link's in the description down below. Throw him a follow. My man, it was great to talk to you about this matchup. It's going to be a fun one on Sunday. No score predictions. A little early for that. I usually do Sunday morning score predictions, but I'm sure the folks can see what you're thinking over on the social media. I appreciate you jumping on with me today, man.
Hey, anytime, Cody. Appreciate you, bud.
All right, great stuff there from my guy, Ryan Edwards. Fantastic when it comes to covering the Broncos. I've been going on his show for, 5-6 years now, talking Broncos football, Texans football. they've matched up with the Broncos quite a few times over the past few seasons, and this one no different with a tough one on Sunday. Man, I did not realize that defense had been that nasty post-veterans. And that's an intriguing little situation there in Denver. Can't turn the ball over, obviously. But, hey, I like the fact that we're talking about the Houston Texans winning shootouts. Hey, if it's a shootout, the Broncos maybe ain't got it. Well, the Texans do. Well, wouldn't that be nice? A shootout where the Texans got too much juice for the opposing team? I'd like to see that come Sunday. You know what I'd like to see as well? You sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy, the best way to play fantasy. Their pick'em format's unmatched. You can 20 times your entry in just one game, one afternoon. Underdog Fantasy, so easy to play with the pick'em format. You're just predicting higher or lower on stat projections. That's right. Higher or lower, you slam 5 of them together, you could 20 times your entry. Heck, you can up to 100 times your entry with the new Scorcher feature, which multiplies your payout. A couple of weeks ago, I hit a 20-1, and then I followed it up with another 20-1. You can do it as well at Underdog Fantasy. UnderdogFantasy.com. The link in the description down below will get you to the sign-up page. First-time depositors, you're going to get 2 times your first deposit with my promo code Stoots, S-T-O-O-T-S. Promo code Stoots, S-T-O-O-T-S is going to get you 2 times your first deposit. The link in the description down below will autofill that for you as well. And if it doesn't, use Stoots, S-T-O-O-T-S, as the code. Go check out my friends at Underdog Fantasy. They support the channel. We like to support them, of course, game responsibly. Appreciate you watching the video. A little check behind enemy lines with my buddy Ryan Edwards. Throw me a thumbs up here on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And there's plenty more content to come here on the YouTube channel. Talking about the Houston Texans, because I sure love talking about the Houston Texans with you. And I can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.